Thank you very much. Thank you for the wonderful and generous presentation or introduction, Colonel Hampton. But it's really a pleasure to be here and to talk to you a little bit about maritime security. And it's a great privilege for me to share the table with my good friend, Dr. Bando. In fact, when I heard that I would be sharing the table with her, I recalled a meeting we had in South Africa. Dr. Bando and I integrated an interagency team that the United States government sent to South Africa to help a foundation, the Brenthurst Foundation, in trying to put together a framework for a maritime strategy for the AU. At that meeting, I remember in one of the breaks, Dr. Bando and I were talking, and she gave me a very profound insight that I never forgot. She told me, look, you know, Assis, when we look at Africa, we tend to focus on the mass land that Africa is, the vastness of Africa. But we fail to focus on Africa as an island. When you look at the map, you can see that Africa is really surrounded with water. And let me just grab I forgot my most important tool. Margot was probably saying, oh, what is that Malaquias doing? You know, he doesn't have the clicker. I went, yeah. So this is how I want to start my presentation. The fact that Africa is one very big island. So if we keep that at the back of our minds, everything else that we're going to be talking about maritime security then makes sense. The fact that Africa is surrounded by water. So if you're an island, when you're thinking about security, you cannot neglect the waters that surround you. If you're an island, when you're thinking about development, you cannot ignore the waters that surround you. This, for me, is one of the most profound insights that we should keep in mind as we talk about maritime security. And to that, I'm thankful to my good friend, Dr. Bando. And because of this, the strategic importance of Africa is self-evident. Is self-evident. Because Africa borders major sea lanes, and much of the trade that goes to other parts of the world go through those waters. Also keep in mind that 38 African states are either coastal or littoral states. Or I should say better, they're either littoral or island states. Only 15 of them are landlocked. So this is another very important factor to keep in mind. The other important factor, and again, following the same theme, is that Africa's maritime domains are very central to Africans' expectations for both security and development. And as we're going to be talking about in greater detail, it's not just about the security of states that we are talking about. It's also about human security. It's about economic development. And one of the works one of the things that has been really patent in the works that we've been doing is that connection between security and development as far as the maritime domain is concerned. Look, for example, at the importance of fish in Africa. Most African countries, especially in littoral Africa, depend on fish as their source of protein. In some countries, this goes upward to 60%. So if you remove fish from that equation, then what you have is pretty soon malnutrition with all the consequences that derive from malnutrition. So this in terms of the contexts. What I wanted to do now is to look at some of the threats to maritime security in Africa. And I will deal with them in this order. I will first talk about IUU fishing. Then I'll be talking about human smuggling and trafficking in persons. Then other types of smuggling. Then piracy and port crime. IUU fishing. And by the way, when you talk to American audiences, when you talk to non-African audiences, and you talk about maritime security, the expectation is that you're going to be talking about piracy first. But if you ask Africans what their top priority is as far as maritime security is concerned, they obviously say it's fishing, it's IUU fishing. For obvious reasons, I say, because Africa loses about $1 billion a year in stolen fish. And by the way, this, in my own view, is an underestimate. Is an underestimate. Because as you'll see in the next slide that I'll show you, there's some revisions already being made to the amount of fish that's being stolen from Africa. And this is out of a total of 23 billion global annual losses. Africa loses. The figures that most people use is $1 billion. My sense is that this is much, much, much greater. One of the problems, of course, we have is that we don't have targeted programs to just trying to estimate how much Africa is losing. Now, but there's, I don't know if you can see this well. Just recently, a study was made trying to assess the amount of fish one particular country steals from Africa. And everybody was shocked because we were underestimating by a factor of something like 10. And this one particular country, is especially targeting West Africa. Especially targeting West Africa. Just look at this. 2.9 million tons worth an estimate $7.1 billion out of West Africa alone. So what I'm suggesting is that we really have to go back and carefully assess the amount of fish that's being stolen from Africa. And that will get us to revise that $1 billion per year very, very quickly. That $1 billion per year for me doesn't make much sense at all. But the importance of this, again, it has to do with human security. Go to a country like Senegal. I know some of my brothers here are from Senegal. Remove fish from the Senegalese culture, and you have major issues. And speaking of Senegal, I was recently there talking to a friend. He took me to the beach and said, "Look, let's go buy some fish." were not able to buy some fish. And he asked the fisherman, well, where is the fish? And the fisherman said, well, the fish hasn't arrived yet. Well, the fish hadn't arrived yet, and I couldn't understand what he was talking about. Don't you go out and catch the fish? The fish hasn't arrived yet. And this guy was a captain in the Senegalese Navy, told me, well, apparently the imported fish has not arrived yet. So even Senegal right now is importing fish. We can talk about this a bit more later. Human smuggling. Human smuggling is a big issue. And much of the human smuggling uses the sea as a conduit or as an avenue. Not too long ago, I spent a year in Spain, and it's actually quite tragic because on a daily basis, the Spanish media reports incidents of Africans attempting to cross the sea into Europe and their rickety boats capsizing. It's a complete tragedy. The estimates are on the board for you to take a look at. It's something that African leaders like yourselves need to do something about. The deaths of Africans trying to cross the sea to Europe shouldn't be happening. Shouldn't be happening. At the very least, we should have naval forces that prevent our African brothers and sisters from actually attempting those very, very, very dangerous crosses. The other issue that is really very much connected to maritime security is trafficking in persons. As we all know, what we're really talking about here is the exploitation of individuals, Africans being taken from Africa to other places for the purposes of being exploited in all sorts of different ways, whether we're talking about sexual exploitation, forced labor, and so on and so forth. It's a very lucrative trade. The value of this trade is something like $32 billion. So you can understand why this is something that is it's such a lucrative business, and Africa is such a ready supplier of really poor Africans, that Africa is really at the epicenter of this issue. Again, this is something that we need to pay close attention to. Narcotic smuggling is the other big issue, especially in the Gulf of Guinea. Africa, of course, is becoming a major hub in a global narcotics trade. A country like Guinea-Bissau. Guinea-Bissau, of course, has graduated or has descended better into the status of the first narco state in Africa. That's the extreme. But when you go to West Africa, there are very few countries in West Africa that are not dealing with this problem. The big strategic mistake that Africans made about a decade ago was to think that Africans would not consume the imported drugs. The mistake was to assume that Africa would remain a conduit, would remain a transit point, perhaps storage areas for the drugs. that has changed very rapidly. Some drugs are now being retained in Africa and are being consumed in Africa. This has a massive impact on society. The very fabric of society in many places in Africa is fraying because of the influx of drugs. The other thing is that Africa already has important challenges. Now, drugs represent challenges of such magnitude that very few countries in Africa are fully capable of handling. Very few countries in Africa. Even those that on the surface appear very strong, they don't have the capacity to handle this massive influx and all the consequences that derive from that. So, very, very important area that we need to keep an eye on. Now, again, as I said, many African countries felt that what happened in the Americas would not happen to them. But of course, the events over the last 5-10 years are proving those predictions completely wrong, and things are getting worse. Things will get worse unless something is done very quickly. The other issue that I wanted to touch on is piracy. Dr. Bando will touch on this in some detail later, but let me just make a couple of important points here. What we see on the waters surrounding Africa is really a symptom of problems on shore. We saw this in the Horn of Africa. The state in Somalia collapsed, and one of the consequences of that collapse was Somali piracy. What we see in the Gulf of Guinea is something similar. We're not talking, of course, about state collapses, but certain parts of some states are so weak that what we see in the Gulf of Guinea in terms of criminality at sea is a consequence, is a direct consequence. The one or two countries that are producing most of the criminal activity in the Gulf of Guinea. These are countries that on the surface, as I said, appear strong, but they have such important vulnerabilities. They have such important vulnerabilities that they cannot handle what's going on at sea. That's one point. The other point is that their societies are weak and becoming weaker because of all sorts of pressures that, if we have the time, we can get into. Couple that with the fact that the Gulf of Guinea, you have all sorts of activities there, and they're very easy preys. What am I talking about specifically? You have a tremendous amount of activity in the oil and gas sector taking place. You have ships laden with crude oil slowly going up and down the Gulf of Guinea. Very easy targets for the criminal element. So this is something that we keep an eye on. And I know Dr. Bando is going to be talking about this. The Horn of Africa, the piracy in the Horn of Africa is declining. Criminal activity in the maritime domain of West Africa is going up. A lot of people ask me the question, well, Professor, why is it that the international community is not acting the same way in West Africa as it did in the Horn of Africa. I say it's simple. Well, first of all, the international community is doing a tremendous amount of good in West Africa. Dr. Bando and I have been personally involved in some of these activities. But there's one important difference that we have to keep in mind. Piracy is an international problem. Armed robbery at sea is a domestic problem. Simple as that. That is to say, when the pirates operate, or when the criminal element operates in international waters, that is piracy. When the criminal element operates within national waters, that is armed robbery at sea. When it comes to piracy, the international community has the primary responsibility to act. When it comes to armed robbery at sea, because it's a domestic issue, the international community does not have the primary responsibility to act. State governments do. So, the international community, the United States, for example, cannot deploy a flotilla into the Gulf of Guinea to handle those activities that affect the waters of Nigeria or Benin or Togo, or now recently all the way down to Gabon. Can't do that. Can't do that. Is not our primary responsibility. Is the primary responsibility of the national governments. It's a matter of sovereignty. Now, can the international community assist? Of course. It can assist, and it is assisting. I was just recently in Senegal, and our good friends, the French, had 3 very large ships, docked in Senegal for resupplies. They're doing the work up and down the coast of Africa. And by the way, recently a foreign diplomat came to see me and asked, why we, the United States, are patrolling African waters. I said, no, we're not. We're not patrolling African waters at all. We have, and again, Dr. Bando is going to talk a bit more about this. We have some programs, but it does not amount to patrolling African waters. We leave that to the French. This map here is just to give you a sense of, that one is a bit clearer, just to give you a sense of the magnitude of the problem. In West Africa, you can see where some of these activities are concentrated. There's also increasingly, and this is just to finish, so I can give Dr. Bando some time to also make your presentation. The other thing that we need to be concerned about is maritime terrorism. This is a big problem. I think that what we see now is really just the tip of the iceberg. Unfortunately, there's every indication that maritime terrorism is here to stay. Whether we're talking about attacks on vessels, whether we're talking about the potential for attacks on oil platforms, and even the use of the oceans as a conduit for terrorist devices. So I took a few minutes of your time basically to make 2 points. that you cannot neglect maritime issues in Africa because Africa is a big island. So as islanders, we cannot ignore the seas. Or we can, at our own peril. Our own peril. The other thing that I wanted to stress is the fact that there is an important link between what's going on at sea and what's going on land. Very, very connected. The insecurity and lack of development onshore has important effects offshore, and vice versa. And we need to therefore clearly understand that importance and those connections so that we can find responses. And finally, these responses have to be collaborative. These responses have to be collaborative because no African country, repeat, no African country alone can deal with its own maritime security challenges. Countries have to work together. Countries have to work together to address these issues. Colonel Hampton, I'm going to leave you here, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.